30th is the anniversary of the election of a pro-slavery legislature in the territory of Kansas at the behest of the Border Ruffians back in 1855. And that might strike you as a rather obscure, frankly tedious little incident in the run-up to the American Civil War. But it's not, because it illustrates the profound meaning of the term self-government and democracy and how easy it is to get it wrong. See, what had happened, obviously, by the 1850s, the issue of slavery was tearing the United States apart. It was leading them toward this incredibly bloody confrontation, and the statesmen were trying to compromise on the issue. On the fundamental question, are blacks human beings or not? They were trying to split the difference, as the original Constitution had with sort of 3/5 clause. And so, as settlers were moving into the Kansas and Nebraska territories, and the United States was territorially expanding, and people wanted the railways to go through, they wanted there to be farmers. People move in, at some point you apply for statehood. And so the question is, shall they be free states or slave states? And back in 1820, the decision in the Missouri Compromise had been south of a certain line, you could have slavery, north of it, you couldn't. But in the aftermath of the acquisition of a bunch of territory from Mexico and the admission of California as a free state, people were re-examining the question. So what could be fairer than the proposal, which came from President Franklin Pierce and from the rising Democratic star, Senator Stephen Douglas, that we let people vote on it? Isn't that how we do things? Isn't the United States a democracy? Well, no, not really. The United States was a republic. That is to say, a place where the rule of law is not of men. And for this democracy to be a useful tool for getting good laws, a device for self-government, there have to be shared ground rules. People have to understand the idea here is that the majority gets to govern, but the minority gets to oppose and to organize in such a way that one day they might be able to govern. And it must also be a device for securing our rights. If it is simply that whatever the majority votes for is legitimate, if there is no natural law, if there are no rules we are bound to respect just because they are right, then having people vote on things is simply a device for creating mob plunder and oppression. The tyranny of the majority, it's not just a phrase, it's a very real and frequently terrifying phenomenon that you see in populist states. The upheaval, the turmoil, the bloodshed, because it doesn't respect fundamental rights. And that's what happened with so-called Bleeding Kansas. Once the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed in 1854 saying we will decide by popular vote, is it to be free or slave, the people who were pouring in weren't going because they wanted to farm, they were going in because they wanted to win this fight. They were either going to make it a free state, the Jayhawkers, or they were going to make it a slave state, the Border Ruffians. And this proves, among other things, that rights are indivisible, because the argument was whether black people should have rights. And some people said it's got nothing to do with white people if we enslave black people. But the fact is that once people are fighting, which is what they started to do, over whether blacks would have rights, they started terrorizing and murdering white people. You cannot separate the issues. And the problem here is that there was not a fundamental agreement on the ground rules, that we would have a civil discussion, we would abide by fair play, we would protect rights. And so the Border Ruffians at one point succeed in forcing through this pro-slavery legislature. They even get a pro-slavery constitution, and then there's a vote and it's shot down. I use that term quite literally because the result was determined by brute force, not by a show of hands. Well, the hands had muskets and daggers and torches in them. So the lesson here from this, again, as I say, apparently trivial incident, is that democracy, the counting of votes, is a useful way of securing our rights, provided that we are in fundamental agreement that the idea here is to preserve our rights, to have rules, because human beings have inherent rights, and the job of a legal system is to see to it that those rights are respected in an orderly and practical manner. If you throw that out the window and just say the majority can do whatever it wants, you don't get a new and better form of government. You get Bleeding Kansas. You get riot, arson, murder, and you get fake democratic results. So that is an important lesson from this superficially obscure incident back on March 30th of 1855. If you're enjoying these features, please go to my website, that's johnrobson.ca, and make a pledge so I can continue my work, and continue watching and subscribing to The Rebel for the commentary and the news that you will not get anywhere else.